I didn't realize that our next keynoter, David Kraft, and myself share something about our careers here at Cal Poly. David Kraft was hired before he started his senior year for a job at the Telegram-Tribune. Not a bad one. He took it as a sports reporter. He went to school in the mornings and did sports reporting in the evenings. He went to work after the TT for Volleyball magazine, which Dennis Steers, one of our grads, started with another gentleman, John Hastings. Dennis has been with us the last couple nights. I don't see him. Oh, there he is in the back. Thank you, Dennis. Dennis started the magazine, and I asked him, well, why did you hire Kraft? And David Kraft was the first hire for the magazine. And he said, well, we knew that Dave had something going. He was a strong reporter. He was a dogged worker. He didn't complain, and he would go places, and he has. And I said to both Dennis, and I said it to David the other day, I would argue that part of the reason Cal Poly has a beach sand volleyball and the volleyball programs have grown across not just the coast of California, but up and down and around the country is because of Volleyball Monthly and the work that these guys did all those years ago, so congratulations. Dave ended up working for a Paul Allen startup called Starwave up in the Seattle area, and then in 1996, the call came from ESPN. David Kraft is the editorial guru of ESPN. He is the VP of News. He is the guy that's going to tell you what's happening. As ESPN calls him, the primary news leader at the network. Dave joked with me that news for him can sometimes just be a sprained ankle, but I had to remind him that Disney bought ABC News and ABC Television, not for ABC News or ABC Television, but for ESPN. So he has the big dog job in that group. And part of the reason you trust the news from ESPN is because of David Kraft. Please join me in welcoming our second keynoter, David Kraft.
Thank you all for coming. It's an honor to be here. Let's start quickly. There's no ESPN meeting, no ESPN get-together. It doesn't start with a video clip. So let me see if we can go to that.
If you're a fan.
And tonight, a special night of NBA basketball.
If you're a fan.
Glad you're with us tonight.
What you'll see in the next minutes, hours, and days to follow may convince you you've gone to sports heaven. Beyond that blue horizon is a limitless world of sports. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. With ESPN. And right now, you're standing on the edge of tomorrow.
Booyah!
I love this clip. It was actually part of a marketing campaign that we had relaunching our app and going to direct consumer. But it tells a story as much as it sells a product. From the early days of ESPN, when the founders had this vision of a 24-hour news network, to today, when we reach about 200 million people a month consume an ESPN product. So about 70% of Americans consume something from ESPN every month. It's a pretty remarkable success story, and I got my start here at Cal Poly. It mirrors a lot of why we're here this week, the growth of ESPN. There's vision, there's opportunity, there's journalism, there's taking chances, there's having clear goals. Sounds a lot of what Jim Hayes taught us. So let me start with this. I'm thankful to be here, and I appreciate being able to talk today. I left Cal Poly almost 40 years ago. This town as a university has been a part of my life since then. Met my wife here, my kids were born here, we lived in San Luis Obispo for a long time. The fact the university and this journalism department remembers me and thinks I have something to add is pretty humbling. So thanks for having me. I'm proud of the students that organized this week, this Mustang Media Fest. This is a great undertaking, and I hope you know how well it has turned out, and I hope you're happy with what you've done. I'm proud to be an alumnus of the journalism department that cares enough to have it and to do it every 4 years. Cal Poly shaped me, and it's shaping the next generation of journalists through seminars like this, through all the work that you do. We should be grateful and celebrate a place that continues to invest in students and invest in journalism, especially in today's really complicated world. I'm also proud to be part of the Jim Hayes family tree. Hayes molded us. In my office at ESPN, right over the top of my desk, there's a bookshelf, and there's a picture of Hayes there, and it's a yellow newspaper article from the LA Times that the Times wrote about him, and it's got the photo that you've all seen of Hayes looking over his glasses. If I was smart, I would have framed it, or framed it better. I just threw it in a cheap frame. It's all yellowed. I should have had it safe from the light. It's kind of better that way. It kind of looks like a newsroom. It looks like Hayes. Looks like what Hayes would expect, all yellowed and frayed and all that. And he looks at he looks at me every day when I do my journalism. It calms me. It calms all of us, when we go through our days. So, having Hayes look at you is not the worst thing in the world. Current business speak is sort of, you need to have a personal board of directors. You guys have heard that. They're the people who give you a daily dose of reality when you need it and boost you up. Hayes was kind of the permanent chairman of my board of directors, and I think for a lot of people here, I didn't make a career decision for the 25 years after I left Cal Poly without asking Hayes. And he sold it straight. I thought I was the only one. When I came back here in 2014 for the first one of these, I found out that there were like 50 other people that had the same relationship with Hayes. I was bummed for a minute, but then realized it was kind of a cool thing. He had that kind of influence on us, and I hope you've seen some of that today. When I was offered that job at the Telegram Tribune as a senior at Cal Poly, I'd come up here to be the sports editor of what was in the Mustang Daily. Someone had left, I think Dennis had left to go to Volleyball Monthly at the time, and there was a job opening, and Eric Burdick asked me if I wanted it. So I asked Hayes if I should take it. As always, I called Hayes, and he looked at me like, I'd questioned his golf handicap, which he should never have done. As a student, more than once I challenged Hayes to play golf. With the hope that a win might get him to reconsider a grade when I got one of those Fs. I didn't win any of them, ever, especially at Morro Bay, which was Hayes' home course, either Sea Pines or Morro Bay. And if you went to play golf with Hayes at Morro Bay, you were bound to lose, and I always did. So my Fs remain that way. So I convinced my parents I would graduate. I took Hayes' advice, and in September, finished 40 years in the business, thanks to Hayes. So the tales you've seen are Hayes with papers filled with red ink and see me. We turned our papers in that back then with from a typewriter, so Hayes could print them out and write on them. That sea of red ink, and there was a lot of it, trust me, but it was all full of caring. He wanted us to be great. He wasn't really satisfied to let us miss an opportunity to reach our potential. His potential for us was bigger than our own. So there isn't a day that goes by 40 years later that I don't think of Hayes. I still get mad when I misspell a noun. I still get an F. But anyway, his impact shows on us. So let's move on. So his teachings were really important to what we did, what I did. My career has been an interesting combination of being prepared, being open to change, and being in the right place at the right time. You kind of make your own luck in this business, and you need to be willing to look for opportunities. And when they come to you, you need to be ready to take advantage of them. And that's part of what Hayes taught us too when we were here at Cal Poly. I started the Telegram Tribune covering high schools and taking calls. You sat in the office tonight and took phone calls. Every young journalist should have to track down a cross-country score from a bar in Cuyama Valley, and get results from a meet. It teaches you details, perseverance, the ability to get information from somebody who either doesn't want to give it to you or maybe in no condition to give it to you. Eric Burdick was my first sports editor. Eric spent 20 years at the Telegram Tribune. He's a Cal Poly math major. After all, he started here. He worked in the sports and information department, went to the Telegram Tribune. He actually finished his career at Cal Poly. I know he's still around. I believe he's working a Cal Poly football game tomorrow night. So Eric's still part of that. So Bird was a mentor here. Our goal was to get names in the newspaper. We covered games. We shot our own pictures in those days. We were everywhere we could, everywhere it could be. Our pages were, they weren't full of the AP Wire. They were local. They were sort of about local athletes, schools, games, and we emphasized people. First story I wrote, and I just found this because Meg found it, was about Ty Cobb. I'm not old enough to have covered that Ty Cobb. He was a golfer in Napomo. Eric on my first day sent me to Napomo to the Black Rock Golf Course to talk to Ty Cobb. It was the day before Pete Rose broke Ty Cobb's record for most hits in baseball. Meg found the clip. Dennis had given me all my clips from the Telegram Tribune last time I was here, so I have every clip from the library of the Telegram Tribune. So I found the story. I'd really make a couple edits if I could. It wasn't that good, but it was the first one I had. But we found the local angle to the national story. It was part of the Know Your Audience part of things. You heard a little bit Susan talk about it. We've talked about it for the last couple of days. Know your audience. Our audience cared about local people, so we covered things locally. We took singles from every Little League game for a while until we didn't. I think Dennis can correct me. I think John one day decided he'd had enough of taking singles, the woman on the phone said, "Well, you always take singles," and we said, "Well, today we're not taking singles." And she happened to, believe lived next door to the publisher. Anyway, there was an opening a couple days later. John had gone full-time to the magazine, and that's how I got the Cal Poly beat. So that's one of the ways opportunity happened, and I got to cover Cal Poly. We took golf scores, as I said, in fish counts back in those days. I learned the difference between the ling cod and a red rock cod. So Verge's Landing called in every night, and we took the scores and put them in the agate in the newspaper. We'd trade them with the LA Times once in a while for a football score back in those days. There's also Laguna Lake Golf Course. Does it still exist out there? Probably, I don't even know. Laguna Lake Golf Course, there was the woman who called in scores every Tuesday, and we took the top 3. So she would call in, say, here's the people that, and there's 6 people for first place. We're like, okay, we're done. Well, then who was it? Then 6 more were in second place. We're like, no, that's 7th place. Never convinced her that this. So we always ran 15 names where we really were supposed to run 3. And this woman was persistent. She died one day when I was at the paper. And because we had sit and complained about her all the time, they sent me out to her house to work on her obituary. It turns out this woman had, started a number of local charities. She'd worked in World War II as a nurse. She had an unbelievable story. She was the pain in the butt that called us in the newsroom and couldn't figure out what the scores were. Everybody's got a story. Remember that. Even when you don't know, they have a story. I learned my lesson. My first big scoop was Cal Poly hired a new football coach. And they wanted to make a big announcement, and we wanted to get it in the paper the day before, because that's what we do. We try and ruin the announcement of the athletic department. I got the story because I called the administrative assistant to the athletic director. And I said, did you book a room for such and such a family? She said, yes, we booked a room at, Apple Farm or wherever it was. Called the Apple Farm. They said at the time, yep, they're here. So the next day in the paper, we had the name of the football coach the day before the announcement. All thanks to the administrative assistant who was just helping me out. So, you need to remember, remember people. People matter in what you do. So don't sleep on that. The Telegram Tribune laid a great foundation for me. They were great years. As David mentioned, I went into Volleyball Monthly. I told Dennis a story last night. I think I was making about $17,500 at the Telegram Tribune at the time, which was enough that it was great. I got married, I had money. Dennis and John crazily offered me $22,000 a year, and I thought I was, why would I not take that? So I went and worked for Dennis and John. I got to travel the country. I met people. I made contacts I never would have had in volleyball. I didn't grow up as a volleyball player. I covered it here at Cal Poly. But I learned to look at things through a national lens instead of a local one. Totally different way of doing journalism. They sent me to the Olympics in Barcelona, first really major international event I got to cover. Spent 3 weeks in Barcelona, which was a career highlight. Meg's here. She spent time for the 3.5 weeks I was in Barcelona with a 1-year-old and pregnant with our second child. So thanks to her for that, as I was off covering volleyball. I covered the U.S. women's national team at the time. One story that you may find funny, the early rounds were in this little gym, and it didn't have any air conditioning. And you're in the Spanish summer, so it was a little warm in there. All the TV guys got to sit down low where it was pretty cool, and they put the print guys way up at the top, and it was hot. And the only thing they had in the press room was ice cream and beer. And so we would start the first matches at 10, 1, 5, and 8, or whatever the matches. And we lived for about 10 days on ice cream and beer. Was the only thing we ate. But I came home and read a 10,000-word story, ran in the magazine. One of the proudest things that I've gotten to do is cover that. We covered a lot of beach volleyball. David mentioned the program here at Cal Poly. Those are days that were incredible characters, incredible stories that we got to tell. And going to the beach for the weekend wasn't the worst office to sit in, in those days. So, John and Dennis are people that shaped my career. So the magazine world was different. It was I learned about being a small publisher. I learned about ads. I learned about all sorts of things I didn't deal with in the newspaper. In 1995, they sold the magazine. Rightly, they made some money out of it. I worked for some people I didn't know and didn't really want to work for. I needed to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I had a friend in Seattle who had worked with me at the Telegram Tribune. He found a little want ad in the Seattle Times. And he sent it to me. I think he mailed it to me at the time, probably cut it out and mailed it to me. And it was a company called Starwave. Paul Allen was the Microsoft co-founder, and Paul Allen was trying to figure out what the next wave in media was going to be. So I flew to Seattle. I took a chance, got a job. So that networking pays off, and you can't network, you can't remember people. I mean, Tony had gone at that point. In Seattle, but got me a job, or got me at least the doors to get a job. So I moved to Seattle, lived there for 6 months while Meg was here in San Luis Obispo. We finally got back together. Starwave was with our kids. It was just an unpredictable time in the media world. Still unpredictable 30-some years later. Starwave, produced what they called CD-ROMs, which none of you students know what they are. There was going to be the cool newest thing in media were these CD-ROMs. We did one with Clint Eastwood. I still have a shot glass in my office at ESPN. It's the Clint Eastwood CD-ROM shot glass, and everybody wonders what it is from those days. But they had a product called the ESPN Sports Zone at the time because Disney and ESPN weren't quite sure they wanted to get in this whole internet game. So I was there for 9 months. I was there 9 months after it started. It was the infancy of sort of online journalism. It was a really remarkable ride, for that time. We experimented. We did things that had never been done. We made unbelievable, mistakes in distribution, but not in the journalism. But we found out that it could work in a real-time market. Before that, stories had to wait for the 6 o'clock news or the next day's newspaper. We could put them out in real time. We had minute-by-minute scores. We had automation of games. We had online fantasy leagues, which no one had. It was a really heady time. It really helped that we had Paul Allen's money, because I think at one point we went through about $800 million of his money trying to figure it out. So it helps to have people have money, too. There was a weekly ultimate Frisbee game at lunch. Everybody played. Came back to work after that. I don't think anybody showered. There was lots of free Snapple in the fridge. It was a unique time in journalism and for me. But we were determined to figure out what our audience wanted, which was something rare at the time. Before that information was sent out to you as a consumer, you sat back and got it. This was the first time you leaned forward and asked for the information yourselves. You could choose. It's a whole different mindset of what journalism was, and that sort of interaction has shaped media going forward. I covered the World Series once in Atlanta. It was Atlanta and the Yankees. I think it was 1997. And there was a pitcher named Mike Bielecki, who I'll never forget. He was a forgettable reliever for the Braves. We gave Mike Bielecki a cell phone that at the time was about this big. And he stood in the outfield during batting practice and answered questions from users that they sent in to someone. He took, the person read the answers, he answered them, the guy typed them in, and they were sort of this real-time back and forth. Pretty primitive for what today is, but it was unique. No one had ever done that before, and we were able to do that. We wrote live during events. I was fortunate enough to cover Mark McGwire's chase for the home run record. At the time, Roger Maris had a home run record of 61 home runs, stood for a long time. I got to go for 10 days waiting for Roger Maris to hit his 62nd home run. Fortunately, he hit it on the last day of a homestand, so I didn't have to travel again. But the unique part about it is I was in the press box. He hit the home run. I'd written some background copy. I wrote a lead. I sent it in. Mark McGwire took a long time to get around the bases that night. He shook everybody's hand, everything else. We had the story online before he hit home plate that he'd broken the record. We were really proud. The guy next to me in the press box couldn't believe it. His story wasn't going to come out for another 18 hours, and mine was out that night. We reached 100,000 people my first week there. We thought that was huge. It was a tech startup. We probably had beer or something in the office for that. But little did we know what we'd accomplished. In 1999, Disney bought Starwave through a variety of transactions, and they came to everyone who was doing the content part of it and said, "You're moving to Connecticut." I think Meg said, "That's one of those little states up in New England, right?" So yes, we moved east, settled in New England. We still live there. We still live in Farmington, Connecticut. We're about 2 hours from Boston, about 2 hours from New York. I go to ball games in both. I still root for the Dodgers. I could care less about either the Yankees or the Red Sox. Contrary to popular opinion, I do more than just watch games all day in my office, although I do have 3 TVs, which is great to have 3 50-inch televisions in your office. And I got a satellite farm that'll bring in every game from everywhere in the world. So pretty much any time I can watch a game or I want. I've seen some remarkable events in person. I mentioned McGwire. I think 8 of Tiger Woods' 15 golf majors I was at, which is kind of cool. I've been to the World Series. I've been to the Final Four. I've been to the Olympics. I've been to the Masters. I've been to the Ryder Cup. U.S. Open golf and tennis are big things. I even got to go to the ESPYs once, which was big perk for people at ESPN. I didn't need to go back. I sat in the ESPN newsroom once when they were filming a commercial. Bon Jovi had just released a new album, and they brought Bon Jovi to the newsroom, and they played the first 10 bars of It's My Life for about 6 hours. And just kept going, trying to get it right. And that was one of the ESPN commercials. You can go look it up. I'm sure it's on the internet somewhere. Snoop Dogg filmed a commercial outside my office once. I couldn't get out. I had to call Meg. I said I wasn't coming home because it was blocked. And the contact high probably lasted for a number of days from having Snoop in there. Each job I've had at ESPN, even up to the job I have now as the VP of News, has taught me something. I've been involved in day-to-day editing. I've been involved in strategy. I've been involved in the vision of finding what's next. 10 years ago, I was a Sulzberger Fellow at the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism. ESPN paid for me to go to this. I spent 4 weeks throughout the year there. And the idea was, why should we have separate newsrooms for a television operation and a digital operation? There should only be one. I took that time as a fellow, put a plan together. I got some input from people who were in the class with me, several of whom remain on you talk about my personal board of directors. Hayes is still in charge of it. But I still have others that I talk to. These are people that I go to that don't work at ESPN. They give me advice. They tell me what I need to know. They tell me when I'm off base or when I'm on the right target. You need those people in your life. Those are some of my Sulzberger fellows. But anyway, I took this plan to my bosses. We combined the teams, and for the last decades, I've gotten to manage a news operation that's really unlike any other in the world. We don't care what platform it is. We have a group of reporters. They send news in. We gather, vet it, disseminate it, and then it goes out to a multitude of platforms at ESPN, from television to digital to social to radio to events to text alerts on your phone, all of that. We have one reporter for every NFL team. We have about 100 other reporters throughout the company. We're diversifying the sports we cover. We certainly always, covered women's sports in a way, but certainly, the change in that has been remarkable and really nice to see. So we're a unique newsroom, as I said. We aren't print, we aren't television. Every story goes through my team and gets to the right place. I think I shared with students yesterday, accurate first. We always want to be accurate. It's the top attribute we have. Audiences trust ESPN. We do they do brand surveys at companies, big companies like ESPN, and every one of them, the number one attribute for ESPN is trust. And you can really gain. It takes a long time to gain that, and it takes no time to lose it. So we want people to trust what we do. So whether it's sports, whether it's news, whether it's a report for the president, you want to be trustworthy. And we're not just the toy department, and we joke about that, but we cover race, we cover gender, we cover ethnicity, we cover politics. Changes in social norms all go through sports in the lane of sports. The last several years, how we've covered transgender athletes has completely changed. The wording we use, the care we take in whether we name athletes or not. There was one at San Jose State recently who had never really come out as transgender. ESPN's one of the few places that never named the person. We knew her name. Frankly, I frankly knew exactly when she transitioned. We knew what she was as a 13-year-old player here and through high school and through college. Look, you need to be smart in how, because you know something doesn't mean you have to report it. And we thought very carefully about how we were going to, cover that issue for that community, but as a sports topic. But how athletes interact with each other, how they interact with society is important, and we cover it that way because the basics are still the same, no matter what the medium is, no matter how they consume your information. You got to be accurate, you got to be contextual, you got to hold the powerful accountable. Anything short of that, and we haven't done our job. Somebody asked me recently in a conversation what my North Star is at ESPN, and I sort of thought about it. We inform, we engage, or we inform, we enlighten, we engage, and we entertain. Those are the four things that we do. If a story does that you're covering, informs people, enlightens them, that's the context around it, entertains them, look, we want people to follow our work. Doesn't mean it has to be humorous, doesn't mean it has to be lighthearted, but it needs to be engaging in how people get it. And that's what we do. If you do that, you got the right story. And 40 years ago at Cal Poly, I probably didn't know it in those terms, but that's what I know now. There are more ways than ever to reach audiences, and I know you all as students know that now. You certainly know us from TV now, like I showed there. ESPN.com, where we reach those 200 million people a month. We have 350 radio affiliates. There's one here in San Luis Obispo, I believe. Several of you told me you've interned at it over the last couple days. We're the #1 brand on TikTok. We have more people consume ESPN on TikTok than anywhere else. And I could tell you the number, and I don't remember what it is, but it's in the 70, 80 million people a month see us on TikTok. Our YouTube channel is viewed almost as much as our television channel at times. When I started at ESPN, we were very conscious of you had to come to our platform. We don't care where you see us now. We just want you to see ESPN and trust what we have. We have minute-by-minute analytics these days. I can tell you up to the minute how many people are reading a story. That's changed from having to wait until the circulation numbers come out. But that fan-centric attitude sort of helps us with those, with those data points to make sure we're serving audiences. So it's a pretty remarkable place. I've had a remarkable career to do it. Worked with some great leaders, some dear friends at ESPN. So I can't stress this enough. At every step in my career, I've been willing to explore something new and take a chance. I kind of bet on myself at times and the evolution of this business, and both those bets have paid off. I'm probably supposed to have some bits of wisdom for you all. I'll give you 3 quick ones. Find mentors. Find mentors that matter. We've talked about Hayes. I talked regularly with a student here for years, and I think he's off working today. I talked to him for years. He applied for a job Turns out the hiring manager was somebody I'd hired years ago at ESPN. She was now at another publication. I didn't get him the job. He got the job himself. But in the sea of resumes, I told her, look at this one. And she did, called him, and he's got a job. So that networking helps. People matter, colleagues matter. You know, that person in the press box or in the office at a conference, you know, treat them well, keep in touch. You never know when they're gonna pay off. Your clips and your GPA and those things, they'll get you noticed initially, but there's no substitute for knowing people. And embrace change. Your path is not gonna be straight. I talk at times about how I started in this business. We distributed news by putting ink on a dead tree. We put it in a truck. We drove the truck to some kid's house. They put it on a bike. The kid rode his bike around and threw it on your driveway, and you went out and hoped it wasn't raining. And that's how you picked up your news. How we get the news to you. I covered a prep football game once in King City. You know what King City is? I was on deadline. I wrote my story on an old Tandy TRS-80 computer. You could see 2 lines of text. I went to the payphone to send it in. The payphone had a square thing you talked into, and the couplers were round. You guys know what couplers are? So I couldn't figure out how to send my story because I needed a round phone thing. I went into the Denny's and I asked the manager to go into the office to see if he'd send it. He thought I was robbing the place. I was the only one there at midnight. But I finally talked to him. There was a language barrier. We got through that. He let me send the story. He thought it was going to be a pay call because at the time it wasn't I was sending to an 800 number. So anyway, we got that done. I can publish a story now on my phone to millions of people, and I had to find a coupler back in those days. But technology is just the delivery mechanism. It's made things easier, but it's also back to the basics. Real-time reporting is powerful, but it can also be dangerous. Context matters, and you need to take the time of that. We've talked a couple times in here today. Journalism is under attack in this country. Americans' trust in the media is at an all-time low. A Gallup poll just released this month, I believe, only 1 in 4 American adults have a great or fair amount of trust in the media. It's 8% for people who identify as Republicans. For people in the 30 to 49 age bracket, it's about 20%. And that's fairly alarming. It should be alarming to all of us. Some of it's our own doing. In many cases, we didn't adapt as journalists. We didn't think changes would come to us until it was too late. So there's many outlets I mourn the loss of. It kills me to see newspapers not around. But some of this was self-inflicted. We didn't pay attention to what was coming. Social media today amplifies the fringes. It's not the core. And certainly the current political climate is attempting to put a chill on what we do as journalists. I can speak firsthand, not quite as firsthand as Susan, but when the President of the United States calls out your reporting, as has happened a few times, even in our little sports world, it's not the most comfortable place to be. But we have to stay strong. We have to know what's truth. We need to, it's never been more important. All the lawsuits, all the threats, all the bullying against the news media are a threat not only to our profession, but to democracy. Free press and freedom of speech aren't just hallmarks of journalists. They're hallmarks of all of us. And that needs to be an important part of what we do, whether it's sports that I do or whether it's, hard news around the country. So what we do matters. And I hope you know that. And I hope you believe that when you're here. We need to make sure Americans believe what we know, what we read, or what they read. They don't always, which is our problem, but it's also our opportunity. We have a chance to turn this around. So that's a task in front of all of us here, is to make sure that that's the world that we live in. It's not gonna be easy, but it's vital to us. So you need to continue to listen, to evolve, hold on to the principles of fairness, accuracy, accountability, and context, which makes journalists different than online provocateurs, and there are lots of them out there. So what you learn here, and what I learned here, is practical. It'll enable us to reverse this trend, and we're counting on us to get it done. I'll wrap up by Hayes sent me off in 1985 to be a journalist. I really did graduate in 1986, but as David said, I got a year's head start. He retired, in 92 after 23 years at Cal Poly. He's obviously a writing coach, and he kept doing that afterwards. None of us wrote to Jim on his Facebook page as he was dying, and his daughter read all those notes to him. His obituary, his daughter Kelly talked about that Hayes always had a way of adapting. This is the latest example of that. Mustang Media Fest, you guys have adapted. You've continued to make this work. So as you continue to adapt, as media adapts, as we practice journalism and adapt, don't fight it. Just go along with it. The core values remain. What Hayes taught us remained. And thanks for having me here. The last thing I'll tell you is Hayes really valued a good question. So let's have a couple of them. Thanks.
Oh, God. Hit the emotions there in me, too.
I don't know where that came from, but that's good.
It does.
That's what Hayes did.
It comes all the time. You just touched on it, and I don't know if you have anything more to say about this. You're at a place that is thriving journalistically. We see what's happened to the TT, and I can tell you about my home paper in Fullerton. And
Sure.
what does that mean? And in sports, is sports journalism, are your reporters doing anything differently than I would do as a news reporter?
I hope not. I mean, our it's different in that, I joked that I had to follow Susan, who told you spy stories, and I cover ankle sprains. So the level of journalism may be different at times, but no, the facts remain the same. We need to vet them. We need to hold people accountable. I've talked about, I work at a place that pays the NFL $2 billion a year to cover their games. That's a part of our company that shows games. I'm on the side that covers the NFL, and we cover every wart, everything they don't want us to at times. We try and be fair and honest with them. I'm not looking to take cheap shots, but I'm also looking to cover them accurately the same way the New York Times would, or the Athletic would, or anybody else would.
You are now owned 10% of, is going to be 10% of ESPN is going to be owned by
maybe we'll see if that one goes through. I'm not sure the government's going to go for this
by
one.
the NFL. The NFL is going to get a 10% stake in ESPN. So what does that do to you as the VP of News, the journalist, that you're covering somebody that owns 10% of the company you work for?
Yeah, it's the perception is uncomfortable. The fact that we pay $2 billion a year to cover their games anyway, I don't think they can call and complain any more than they do now. In that regard. But yeah, I mean, we're gonna have to be very transparent. We are very clear in our newsroom that our newsroom covers the league. I have a PR department, I have a programming department that doesn't tell me how to do my job. I don't tell them how to do theirs. And the president of ESPN is the one who has to walk that tightrope. And I've been there 30 years and have never been told I can't do a story, have never been told not to do a story. The only question I get is, did you follow every step? Because when Roger Goodell calls him and is mad at something we've done, he wants me to at least be able to say, I called Roger Goodell to get his comment. I tried to get both sides of the story. And we have never been told we can't cover something.
And your job is exactly like my job. You got a call yesterday morning at 4 a.m., which would have been 7 if you were home on the East Coast.
They thought I was, I didn't tell enough people I was on the West Coast. Yeah, sure. We had obviously a big NBA betting and gambling story yesterday. Yeah, my phone rang at 4:15. Said we got something up. We have a story here, and we spent the next 4 hours or so kind of putting together what happened until the FBI press conference that unsealed the indictments at 10 o'clock. But yeah, at the time we had shows on the air. We had to make some decisions on talent, who was going to be, facing. We had to make decisions on whether to carry the press conference or not. There's a ton of decisions, and also in terms of the reporting, of what did we know. We're certainly familiar with one of those players had actually been looked at and cleared by the NBA. So we had lots of background on him. Certainly, the one about the poker part of it. That was one that was all new to us. So we had to quickly read the indictment and cover it in real time.
And how did you do? How'd your team do?
My team did fine. I think the news was great. I'd like to revisit some of how we handled it on television. But look, you're making minute-by-minute calls, and I would have, we did not carry the press conference live, and I think that was a mistake. But there are reasons why we didn't. And look, reasonable people put their minds together and made a decision.
Can we see some hands? Anybody to the audience? Can we get a couple microphones down here real quick and give Dave a couple of questions?
Yeah, this on? Yeah, there it is. Good. Disclaimer: I've been a fan of the Dodgers since they moved here from Brooklyn, and I just was wondering, seeing this rise of the Japanese superstars, do you actually have people on hire that speak Japanese? Because apparently they have to travel with translators.
It's a great question. Yes, we have very much diversified our staff based on, when I got there, I had no one on my news desk that spoke Spanish. And I was like, well, how can we cover baseball and things without having to speak Spanish? Excuse me. We have a list at ESPN, actually. It's sort of, I send it out once a year, a questionnaire to people in the company who speaks different languages. And I think we have 70 different languages at ESPN to translate. So I bring somebody in who translate. I do not have currently anyone who speaks Japanese. Truth be told, Shohei speaks pretty good English. He just doesn't like to, speak it in public. But I certainly made sure that we had, people that spoke Spanish, with that. Covering women's sports. I mean, for years, men covered women's sports, and I think it's important on our staff that 3 of the 4 people we have covering women's basketball are women. Alexa Philippou, who's a Stanford grad, covers it. Ramona Shelburne, I guess we have 2 Stanford grads. I didn't think about that. Covers it, but it's important as Kendra Andrews it does. So that's. We at one point had all white men covering the NBA, and that's just a bad. We're not getting stories. You need a diverse group. Doesn't mean white men can't cover the NBA. They absolutely should. But there's stories and there are places and there's comfort levels in locker rooms that having diverse newsrooms. Diverse newsrooms inside, but also having a diverse reporter basis. But Japanese is the one that we don't have anybody yet.
Dave, you mentioned the disparity in numbers and trust, the mainstream media versus what you guys enjoy at ESPN. If you were put in charge tomorrow of ABC, CBS, NBC News, from what you've seen as just a consumer, are there some immediate steps you'd do to try to change those numbers?
Yeah, immediate. So we shoot ourselves in the foot sometimes. I'll use ABC, and as a former colleague of David, he may know him better. A guy named Terry Moran was just let go at ABC for his social media posts. Terry's a really good journalist. He should still be at ABC, but he did something unforgivable on social media and played his cards. And we all have biases. It's ridiculous to think that we don't have a bias as journalists, but we don't need to. We don't need to be as pronounced about them, and if we're going to be biased, we need to tell people what they are. So Terry purported to be a Nightline anchor, fairly straight down the middle. His job wasn't to be an opinionist, and he was opinionated on social media. So I would knock that off as quickly as I could. As journalists, I do think, I have social media platforms, and I might post about the Dodgers once in a while on my Facebook feed because that's my friends. I don't post on X or Instagram or that because I just don't think people want the guy running news at ESPN to put his biases on the table. So I would start with that. I do think the way Washington is covered these days is very much at times for show. The press conferences are performance art. And there are performance art in the NFL too. I tell our people, the standing at the podium press conference is the worst place to get information. And I think it's that way in Washington. So I think there's some ways to do that. It's going to take a long time, and I don't know that 8% of Republicans is going to get to 50. That may not be our goal, but I do think that we need to be a little more, straightforward in how we cover things.
In your embracing change, how do you see AI fitting into your reporting and coverage?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're still figuring AI out. If we fight AI like we fought the technology of the internet, we're going to lose. We need to figure it out and make it part of our culture. It doesn't replace reporting. It may make reporting easier in places. We have a stats and information library at ESPN that's unbelievably, for like who threw the last two-hitter on a Tuesday, and I can get that information pretty quick at ESPN. AI will make that more easy. In the field, if someone's done reporting at 5:30, they have to go on the air at 6, and AI can help them get their script started or their thoughts put together. I don't know. That's a bad thing. It's still their reporting. So I'm not as down on AI as some others are. I don't think Look, we have tried to use AI to cover some things we don't cover. Professional lacrosse. We don't get recaps from the AP. There's no way to get them. To write those would be very cost prohibitive. So we've experimented with using actually the play-by-play broadcast and the box score to see if we can put together 3 or 4 paragraphs that will satisfy a need. Still edited by a human editor at the end. But does that get us started? We're trying to figure that out.
And how do you feel about that as an old-time 40-year journalist?
At this point, the fact that we did one of those and somebody had retired and it was their last game and her name wasn't mentioned because she wasn't mentioned in the box score, we still have a long way to go with AI, to figure that out. And I just don't think it will not replace the reporting. AI is only as good as what the information you put into it. And what we bring as reporters is the information we put into it.
You're saying the computer can't go talk to an athlete?
Not very well.
Does somebody have a mic? Yes, go ahead.
Hey, David. Nice to hear you say that you haven't had stories, turned down or be told that you can't cover a particular topic or whatever. Curious though, you work for one of the biggest media conglomerates that has grown over the years. Like, how has that change of consolidation changed or influenced, or what you do at ESPN?
Yeah, we certainly work for, I work for the Disney company. I'm a cast member. Mickey's on my check.
Well, wait, though. You've got I only got the Mickey. What have you gotten? They give you statues at your anniversaries. What statue are you at?
Let's see. I have Mickey. You get Mickey for 15, Simba for 20, Tinkerbell for 25, and January will be 30. And I'm trying to think what I get for Jiminy Cricket, I think.
You're right. I'm sorry.
We have a whole series of statues in our house.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, but working for a conglomerate, look, decisions made by ABC News, and we're trying to get much closer to ABC. I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out, of how we report things consistently. But even, decisions made about Jimmy Kimmel, that's our company, and that affects the perception of our journalism. So that conglomeration doesn't help us. And, we were certainly unhappy as journalists at ESPN that the decision was made. Certainly the creative people at the Disney company in Hollywood were unhappy, and in Burbank, and ultimately, the pressure on Bob Iger to put Jimmy Kimmel back on was a creative pressure. You have to work in the creative community, and that was not going to work if you are silencing creatives. And so, that sort of goes back to they've never told me I can't do anything, but yeah, does it make it more complicated? The fewer places there are, the more hoops you have to go through, certainly.
Somebody else have the microphone? Yeah.
What are the added responsibilities of being the biggest outlet in a given field and having to kind of lead change?
Yeah, the biggest thing that, I'll get to change in a second. The biggest thing is you can't be wrong. If we make a mistake, everybody knows it. The other places, and not taking shots at, one of my best friends ran Fox Sports for a while. He could make the same mistake 10 times over, no one would see it, because Fox Sports is about 1/30th the size of ESPN, at least in a digital space, in that word. So you're owed that. We're actually, I think, this may relate to the last question, we're actually slow to change, or slower than we should be at ESPN. It's just the corporate nature of the place makes us slow. Our I showed that ad, which is really cool, about the direct-to-consumer app, which is a great change for us. You no longer need to go through your cable company to get ESPN. You can buy it over the air or over the top, as we call it, by themselves. But the app still looks the same. Still hard to find. That app is trying to sell things, do news, do features, have video. I mean, that app is carrying a lot of weight, and I think we need to look in the change. So, I think we're obligated to change. I think we're a little slow to do it sometimes.
Kim?
Can you talk a little bit about ESPN Deportes and the importance of Spanish language journalism to your overall enterprise?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have 8 or 9 international divisions. So Deportes for us is almost sort of two things. One, it's what we do in Spanish-speaking countries away from us, but it's also what we do to Spanish-speaking. It's a network here in the U.S. of a Spanish language network. It's hugely important. If you just look at the demographics of voting over the next 20 years, Hispanic voters will be 40 or 50% of the electorate. That's 40%, 50% of our audience. We hire people that can work in both spaces. Whenever we negotiate a deal, our Monday Night Football deal with the NFL includes ESPN Deportes. Our deal with the NBA includes ESPN Deportes because it's a hugely important market for us from a business point of view, but it's also important from a cultural point of view. And the question about reporters, I have a guy that works for me named Alden Gonzalez who covers the Dodgers a lot. Alden we can put him on air and he can translate simultaneously. Alden does an interview for us and he may do it in Spanish for ESPN Deportes, and then and they work in our newsroom. They're equal colleagues to what we do. Certainly not of the same scale, but it's important to us.
You've talked a lot about integrity. You've worked in almost every platform, from, as you said, the dead trees with ink on it, to an online company.
I miss those two.
To one of the biggest news organizations that operates in the country. You gave us all the numbers, which can be fairly depressing. And as we started, as I said, the business and the craft is a bit under assault. So, Mr. Kraft, are you optimistic or pessimistic, and why, for the future of journalism in the United States?
I am unbelievably optimistic. I think we have not figured out ways to share news. And part of that trust, getting back to Pete's question, is going to be sharing it where people are. I talked about us being big on TikTok. We need to figure out how to share news on TikTok that's important, because that's the way audiences get it. I was in a meeting a couple months ago with some of our reporters, and they were talking about their story got stolen for Instagram. I said, well, what do you mean by that? Well, the people who are really good at social media had taken a 1,500-word story and put it down into 8 swipes on an Instagram page. It told the basics of the story. It was really well told. It reached an audience it never would have reached at 1,500 words, that people weren't going to see it. So I'm optimistic about us figuring that out. The one caution is we can't lose the basics of what we do, and that ultimately will win that trust back in that regard. So, when I talked to students yesterday, I had somebody who's trying to break down basketball analysis on and build his Instagram following. I had people who wanted to do radio. I had people who wanted to do podcasts. I see Amanda back there who runs the sports the department. You guys are doing 45-minute pregame shows on games. That's what we do, and you're doing them here at Cal Poly. You're figuring out and hitting audiences, and it goes back to, if we hit audiences, if we're trustworthy, if we evolve with change, I'm optimistic we'll be okay.
Good. Anybody else have a question? Fine. Before we thank Dave, I want to kind of give you a last little message, mostly for the students. There are a lot of us here who, as you saw Dave get emotional talking about Hayes. Our hope is that your producers, Keith Eldridge told me something. Yep. For us, Hayes is always in our head. Our hope is that your faculty, your professors put something in your head that makes you think about what you do when you enter this craft, and that you have that guiding North Star, which Hayes was for so many of us in your career in journalism. Thank you all very much for coming to the Hayes Keynote. We're going to have lunch in just a few minutes. Please thank David Kraft for joining us today and being our keynote.